Hello, hello. I think we should be good. Hello, Amanda. Good to see you. Well, see your avatar. We'll have to make sure that you join us in a bit. Thank you all for coming. Rob, I can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me? Oh, you just said you could.
And you can hear me.
I can hear you too.
Is that a true thing?
Yes.
Perfect. We're doing this.
It's weird that our videos are stacked on top of each other.
I know we need more people.
Oh, there it goes. If I make my window really wide, I can get side by side.
I'm trying to adjust. Oh, there you go. All right, who else? I think people will join. Robert, we're gonna have a good time today. It's gonna be great.
You know, it's a good time when you got the Atari shirt.
So, did you own an Atari?
Of course.
Wow.
I don't have. I gotta get one back here in my stack. This is my retro game stack, but I actually don't have an Atari back there. I have to get one.
I was never one of the cool kids. I never owned an Atari. But actually, we had a Commodore 64.
Oh, and I never had a Commodore.
Yeah, I remember my dad bringing it home. Like it was just the keyboard, right?
Yeah.
Is that the right? Yeah, so just the keyboard. My dad bringing it home, and I was like, what is this thing? And he was so excited when I was little. He was so excited to get that thing fired up. I got to do the shooting button. So we would play this little like space game, side scroller. And all you could do is go up and down and shoot things as they came after you. And I was in charge of just hammering on the fire button. I don't know what it was. I think it was like return. So
that was your first computer.
That was, yeah, officially first computer. And I don't ever remember us doing it more than one time. Like I remember us like setting the thing up and playing that game once. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that was good. And then I was never one of the cool kids with an Atari.
Danny, did you have a Sinclair or a ZX Spectrum? Wasn't that the UK version of like basically the Commodore?
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
No.
Old computers?
No, I think there was a slight age difference there. I don't want to offend anyone.
Oh, you can't. Actually, in California,
but
depending on your age, we may or may not be protected because of our age against offense. So it's true. You need to watch out.
My first console was an Atari. And then it was the SNES. And I barely remember that.
SNES. No one says.
Is that a UK thing? They call it the SNES.
I don't know. I've always called it SNES. I don't know what it is. And then it was Sega. Now that really defined my early childhood. The Sega Mega Drive 2.
What? Mega Drive 2?
Oh, that was good. We never had that. So what was the first game you just like spent like wasted hours of your life on? Or shall I say invested? I know mine.
That's a hard one, you know. But I do remember my brother and I, we used to play Mortal Kombat all the time. And then after that, a little later, it was NBA 98. For some reason. For some reason. I don't know.
There's a ZX Spectrum in the chat.
Oh, Antonio. Oh, look at that. Oh. I never saw that.
I saw Claire. I saw Claire's here. I have a wardrobe update for Claire.
Where is Claire?
Give her even more fuel to make fun of me for.
I feel like we need some real-time comments from Claire on this. we could get started, but we could. Claire, if you would like to join on stage, it's just a click of the button. So I had a NES. Not to be confused with the SNES. That was my first one, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I think my grandma got it for me, and I just couldn't like. Super Mario Brothers was not for me, but Metroid, oh boy, Metroid was the game. And this is before like there were no hints or cheat codes. You had to figure it all out yourself. I just remember like I just dreamed about that game. Anyway, that was the one. All right. I think do we have quorum? Quorum, yeah. All right, team. And all those in attendance. So welcome. Well, let's officially kick this party off. We we have a very, very special Redwood.js meetup for you today. We're excited to dive into. And if this is your first time coming to a meetup, here's how this works. We'll get into after some introductions and the state of Redwood and what we're doing today, we'll get into a longer demo presentation that we have today focused on one topic. And we want that to be as interactive as possible. So please engage via chat, and we'll look for questions as it goes. We'll have talking points throughout the presentation. And then at the end, we'll have open discussion and Q&A, so we'll continue that. And we also can fit, I think, up to 9 or 10 different people on the stage. If you would like to join us real time and have a conversation, discuss questions that you have about the topic today, please feel free. Video is not required for that. You could go audio. And of course, everyone is welcome to stay involved in the chat all along. So that's how we'll run it today. We'll go about an hour once the presentation gets started, including discussion. And we'll make sure we have a break at that time if people need to peel out. And I think that's all the how-tos. So today, did I miss any how-tos? No? All right. So today, we're going to talk about pre-render and Redwood pre-render. So Tom, I didn't set you up for this earlier, but I thought it might be interesting to start with the vision for Redwood. Again, introing the goals of the Redwood project as a whole. And I had some questions about how we kind of ended up with pre-render, because we didn't start there. Like the first roadmap for Redwood did not include anything for pre-render or SSG. And then I had some, I didn't set this up properly beforehand to think about, but I had some questions that kind of lead to how we actually got here. But could you start with just the vision for Redwood and where we were, and also, I had a lot of topics here. Version 1 is coming up, and that's what I wanted to tie into. So I just did a terrible intro there. Too many things in my head this morning.
That works. Okay.
No, you sound like,
We can hear you, but it's all garbled.
Bad robot.
Okay, how about now?
Oh, that's good.
Okay. For some reason, these AirPods on this computer just do not love each other, like at all. Just the microphone though. Speakers work great. Okay, yes. So Redwood originally was an idea for full stack for the Jamstack. So take the architecture of the Jamstack with the CDN deliverable front end and Lambda functions where you could execute your business logic. Take that idea and make a really nice framework around it, integrate a bunch of great technologies, and make it so you could deliver full stack applications easier than ever, more scalable than ever, and do all the heavy lifting to make that possible. So that's like the original conception of Redwood when we first started working on it. Now, the idea for pre-render really is, I mean, it's a little bit of a flipping of what people normally think of as Jamstack. Normally, Jamstack would be SSG or pre-render like everything. Like that's the traditional way that we come at this from like the Jekyll perspective. Jekyll, like a static site generator. Take data, smush it together, render stuff, put it into HTML, CSS, whatever, and then deliver that and you're done. Redwood is a bit of a flipping of that, which is to say, let's be dynamic first so that you have a JavaScript client, and the JavaScript client is using React and renders the screen and then makes data fetch calls over an API to a backend. And that's every page. So none of them are pre-rendered. There is no SSG. So there's like Jekyll. Yeah, I'm filling in the holes of my life here. There's Jekyll, which does all SSG, and then there's Redwood, which does no SSG.
Well, for those who don't know, you were the original creator of Jekyll. So you started, which became one of the more popular, well, actually today is still one of the most popular SSG projects, but you started there with Jekyll.
Yes, correct. So right, so this is like 2009 or something. I wrote Jekyll originally. That became the basis of GitHub Pages, or was integrated into GitHub Pages when we built that feature out at GitHub. So these are two like complementary ideas. Now the problem with a fully dynamic website is that there are certain pages that you really would like to be pre-rendered because there is no need for them to be dynamic. So things like your landing page, your about page, privacy page, And then like those things, those are almost always just going to be static. Like you don't need to make server fetches to get the bulk of those pages. Maybe there's one or two little widgets or something on those pages that you want to fetch dynamically. But in general, give me those pages instantly, store them on a CDN, give them to search engines so that there's no question that the SEO is going to be great for those really, really important pages. So this, I think, maybe it wasn't originally, when we very first started working on Redwood, it wasn't really, we weren't like trying to optimize for that. But I think very early after that, it's like, oh, well, of course you want those pages pre-rendered. There's no reason to do those dynamically. Like that's dumb. And to live in the Jamstack universe, and I think to be legitimately called a Jamstack framework, really, you kind of have to do those things. Like that is inherent in the definition of the Jamstack. So to not do them would be really, really strange. The question for me was always, how do we do them well? How do we do them better than people normally do them? Can we make it easier to use? And so that's why this process has taken a long time. I put out an original sort of idea for pre-render months and months ago, probably in like May or June, when it first started coming up to say, what could this look like? And it gets complicated because if you have pages that have dynamic bits in the URL, like how do you pre-render those pages? How do you fetch the data for those pages? Or what data do you fetch at build time versus what do you fetch at runtime? And so there's all kinds of different considerations that you have to have. And so we had lots and lots of conversations about how it could work, how it should work, what was feasible. And eventually we came down to the point where we're like, we need to stop talking about this and just like implement the easiest part of it, which is the no dynamic URL bits. Just take a page that needs to be static, tell Redwood that it needs to be static, and then let Redwood render it for you. And so Danny started working on that a number of weeks ago, I think at the beginning of the year. And now we're about to launch that. And it's beautiful. Like the way that it works is really, really amazing. Danny did an amazing job. Peter came in and helped a ton on that, and a bunch of other people. And I'm just really, really satisfied with how it turned out and how easy it is to use. And this is just step one. Step one, URLs that have no dynamicness to them. Eventually, the next step will be, how do we do this for sets of pages that might have dynamic parts, like a blog, for instance, where you've got each slug, is the code for the page is kind of the same. It's just the data gets filled in differently. So how would you render a set of some finite set of pages that you want to pre-render, like blog pages? You would want to do that with. Blogs are maybe not Redwood's sweet spot, but if you were doing a blog, that would be like all your blog pages you could pre-render. And how do you do that? How do you fetch the data at build time to get those filled in more of a Gatsby kind of a way? So we want Redwood to be fully dynamic, and then give you the ability to what essentially boils down to different caching strategies to make it more performant. And that's where pre-render and friends of pre-render will come into play.
The friends of. What I really enjoyed about the process that we went through, and again, for those who are joining and learning about the Redwood community for the first time, there are a few levels of people that help maintain. So there's an open community. There's a lot of contributors that are part of the project, and they were participating in the pre-render proposal as well in discussions. And there's a core team, so which Rob and Dom and Danny are part of the core team, and several others. Peter was mentioned, Anthony, but we have 12 people now on the core team that were all a part of these conversations. So the first, like Redwood comes out March last year, and one of the first issues we have in the GitHub repo was, is this SSG, right? Or does it support SSG, right? And we don't know. And I was like, why would we, right? That's not what the goal is, and what would you want? And I just love how this evolved. And there was this nice background conversation that was happening with the core team, that instead of saying, okay, we need to support SSG, how does everybody else do that? The conversation became, what does it look like for Redwood to perform at scale? And kind of this larger plan started unfolding around Redwood performance and Redwood at scale. And that was the approach that this took. So it felt like, instead of just saying, hey, let's do a thing, let's make sure we cover SSG because that's what everybody wants, and who else is doing that, and let's just do what they do. The conversation really took what's the real problem we're trying to address, and how can we make that follow the Redwood philosophy in the final implementation. So anyway, everyone who's joining in on this conversation now, those are the things that took months and months of background to happen. And we're all really excited about this first step into the world of Redwood performance at scale, which is Prerender. Yes? All right. Well, thank you, Tom. You handled that terrible intro like beautifully. Thank you.
That's my superpower.
So it is your superpower. Watch out, though. It makes me not do very good intro handoffs. So because you're so good at it. All right. Well, let's dive in. Anything else before we hand things off to Danny to take us through what is now in Canary for Redwood, the new pre-render feature? No, Danny, it's you, man. It's all you.
Great. Thank you very much for the intro and the preamble here. And so I'm going to start with a demo, but I will warn you a little bit. I didn't get time to prepare this particular project that I'm going to show you. So we're going to follow the guide that Dom and I have been writing. So it's a great test to check how our guide does. And I'll upgrade the tutorial 2 project to support pre-rendering, and we'll just follow the steps and see what we need to do to get it working. Cool. So let me share my screen. Screen 2. Cool. So, for those of you who joined last time, I actually ran through this presentation in quite a lot of detail. But today I want to skip a lot of these things that I talked about at the moment, but go straight into why we're doing pre-render in the first place. Are you guys seeing the screen updated, hopefully? Or is it stuck?
Mine is, it's like chunks of it have updated, but not most of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Let me reshare. Okay, good. So let's first talk about, nice joke there, it's not well pre-rendered. So let's first talk about what happens in your browser when you're loading a single page app without pre-render. So we have these 2 posts that my computer is really struggling. No, it's still not showing up for you guys, I think. I don't know what's happening. One sec, let me exit.
We see a thing.
I think it's the full screen. The compression just gets rid of whatever I'm showing on screen for some reason. So it's still really struggling. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to try and share a different screen, see if this works.
It's like that old Windows bug where you'd like drag the window around and it would just leave like a trace of it, like a trail of the window as you go. That was the best.
Yeah. Maybe I should try rejoining from a different browser.
Sure. You know, this worked beautifully last time, Danny, so
yeah,
we'll get there. And Danny's gone. I think I need to kick him out. I'll kick out Frozen Danny.
his slides are so nice too.
No, because they're made with beautiful AI. That close?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm convinced that live storms, the screen shares and the recordings always end up really challenging. Like there's a lot of lag in the updates of the screen shared window. It's never been this bad though.
No, this is bad. I've looked for alternatives, and I would welcome shopping out Livestorm alternatives. Anyone? Can we throw tomatoes?
The problem is we're never going to get really, really high quality unless we do a streamed, like a properly streamed service, but it makes it more difficult for people to join the stream.
Right, then people can't jump in. Amanda, here.
We tried
The
Hopin.
tomatoes are
We used to use Hopin actually for this meeting.
We did. We could go back to Hopin.
The problem with that was that the screen recordings, the shared screen was also tiny. So everybody had to leave the stage. And then the person presenting was just like, talking at the computer, which also is not a very good experience.
No, it wasn't. Man,
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, yeah. Chat is on fire with puns today, though.
Just one of those days, I guess. Cool. So hopefully,
now we're talking.
Yeah,
that's good.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay, so worth noting, don't use Firefox for Livestorm.
Got it. Okay, so this is where we'll start the video now.
Great. So I wanted to talk about what happens when your page loads when you don't have a pre-rendered app. So we have these two goalposts. The first one is when, the starting point is the browser navigates through the URL, and we want to hit the final goalpost, which is when the page is fully visible and interactive. So without pre-render, what's happening is for us to reach that final goalpost, you have to download the HTML in parallel with the CSS and JS bundles download, hopefully because you're on HTTP2. And then the page has to parse, the browser has to parse, diff, and render your application. And then finally, the page becomes interactive. So the gap between these two posts is the time you see a loader or a white screen. So let's have a look again at what happens when we do pre-rendering. So the difference is the same thing. The download HTML happens first, but you'll notice that this box is a little bit larger than the first slide, and that's because the pre-rendered HTML is just a tiny bit larger than a blank HTML. It then downloads the CSS and the JS bundle, but here's the key difference. Because we pre-rendered the page before including, rendering the JavaScript file, you can see the page before it's fully loaded. And that's why the time that you wait with the white screen or a little loader is in between these two goalposts. And that's why it gets a lot faster. And finally, there's still that final step. It's still loaded up. You've seen the page load up. Now JavaScript loads. It checks what the difference between your pre-rendered HTML and the HTML in your browser is, and then hydrates it, which means attaches event handlers, changes anything that it needs to, and gets it fully interactive. So that's the key difference between a pre-render and a non-pre-rendered page. And I'll do the demo again of how much of a difference that makes. But before we get to that, any questions at this stage? If not, I'll go straight into setting it up.
I'd say, Danny, just a comment. Depending on your bundle size, you've got sort of your goalposts are the same there. Depending on your bundle size, the time to first paint and partial interactivity could be drastically smaller. Not like half, right? Like that diagram is not to scale for probably most people.
Absolutely.
It could be like 1/100th of the time that it would take if you had to wait for the bundle to download and to parse that bundle and to run React, and for React to do its diffing, et cetera, et cetera.
100%, because especially as when you have a big Redwood app or a single page app of any kind, you start including multiple libraries and they have their dependencies. So your bundle keeps growing and growing. And before you know it, you have quite a large bundle that your browser has to download before it displays anything. So you're absolutely right, Tom, that this bar, it definitely isn't to scale because the red bar here could be a lot longer than I've shown in this diagram.
Yeah, and in fact, the parsing of JavaScript alone, just parsing JavaScript, it could be the bulk of your time.
Yep.
Depending on how fast your connection is.
Absolutely.
Danny, I was going to point out too, hydrate is a React specific term, if I understand. At least that's when I was introduced to it. But is there magic or nuances there that we need to understand that are going on under the hood? Or if you were to summarize hydrate, just so people have a mental model of like, oh, that's what that means, how would you summarize it?
Sure. So best thing to do is look at the React documentation for what hydrate does. But if I'll point you guys to that documentation and then just tell you what I think of it. So it'll be here on this page somewhere. So the difference between render and hydrate is render assumes that you have nothing on your page. So it will replace whatever's inside with whatever your React app has in its markup. Now, hydrate does something slightly different. It still does rendering, it still does the attaching, but what it does is it leaves whatever was on your page as is, as long as they match up, right? So if you rendered A in your pre-render and you have A in your JS bundle, it'll say, yeah, these look okay, so there's no need to replace them. Let's just leave it there. But it notices, oh, wait, element A has an on-click handler. So let's attach the on-click handler so that it becomes dynamic. So that's the difference between render and hydrate. And there's a whole bunch of text here. I'm sure Anthony can share a link about hydration. There's a talk, excellent talk from the guys at Google, the Chrome team, that discusses hydration and why it makes things a little bit faster. And largely what we're doing with pre-render is essentially the same concept. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So next, we are going to activate pre-render mode on tutorial 2. So what I'm starting from is the final state, which is if you followed the amazing tutorial 2 that exists on redwoodjs.com over here. So I've gone all the way up to here. I have to tell you the truth, I didn't run through myself. I just checked out code that Rob gave me. But let's just say that I did run all of these steps, but I assume people who are following, you guys have gone through the tutorial, and now you can try pre-rendering on this tutorial project as well. So let's do that together. So first steps. There's a couple of upgrade breaking changes that we need to address before we render our app with Redwood 26. This project is running on Canary, which is going to become our Redwood version 0.26, sorry, I should say. And so the first change we need to do is we need to, let's have a look at the index.js. First thing, app.js. Cool. Next step, let's remove all of the code that uses react-dom.render and also remove these lines here, document.getElement. And what we want to do is export by default a React component that houses your root component for your app, right? So it's as simple as that. App.js contains your root app component. Next, that's the breaking changes there. Actually, there's one more thing we need to do. If you open up index.html, and index.html is right here, we need to add one extra line here. There we go. And the reason we do this is because when Redwood pre-renders your application at build time, it has to know where to place that pre-rendered HTML markup. So this template here tells Webpack that, okay, this is where all of that HTML goes. So once it renders, you see the whole page together rather than HTML just floating outside your Redwood app. So that's the breaking changes so far. There is actually one more thing. Since this project uses Netlify identity, we've noticed that Netlify identity doesn't work with pre-render, as in it doesn't support rendering in Node.js or on the server side. So we need to use a new utility that Redwood has. Let's import is browser from Redwood.js pre-render browser replace. And see this line here where you init Netlify identity. Let's make sure it only runs on the browser. Cool. So these are all of the breaking changes between 25 and 26. But at this point, you're good to go and your app will work. So let's open up roots.
And Danny, we call them breaking changes now, but I guess 2 points I want to make clear for people that are watching this video recording afterward. These changes will all be in the template of a new project when we install them, correct? So this is, when you say breaking, that means for anyone upgrading. And also, if someone doesn't want to use pre-render, how would that affect the project? So my understanding is these are the changes you need to make to use pre-render, but again, not necessarily breaking otherwise.
No, so if you're not using pre-render, you should still be okay without changing, making those changes. You might see an error that comes out of your build process as Redwood tries to pre-render your app. But these changes, you're absolutely right. It's only if you have an existing app that you need to make. If you're starting from scratch, you don't need to do any of this. Those 3 changes that I just did earlier, you can skip all of those things and skip to this part here, where we're going to do the actual pre-render setup. So far what we've done is just upgraded our project to support Redwood 0.26 rather than do any pre-render setup.
Fantastic. And way to make that work, Danny. That's, I'm guessing, a tremendous amount of code under the hood. So thank you. Thanks for helping me understand that.
Cool. So let's enable pre-render. Please do spell check me, because when I'm live sharing, my computer slows down and I make a lot of typos. So all you have to do at this point is add a pre-render prop to the pages you want to pre-render. Cool. Fingers crossed. Let's build web and see what happens. Oh, one sec. Cool. Just one sec. It's because I forgot to set up Canary on this project, I think. Cool. Let's run this. Cool.
That was something
Yeah.
I put in the chat, Danny, while you're running that, is all of this is available right now on the Canary release, which is effectively our final release candidate for version 0.26. And by the time you're watching this recorded video, all of this will be live in a newly released version 0.26.
Always remember to do yarn properly. Cool. Hopefully it is. Just 1 second. Perils of live coding, right?
Rob, this is where we need that tweet about what people think programming is versus what it actually is.
Yeah.
Also, but it's always rad if you have techno music on top of it.
Cool. I'm just going to skip a step because I've messed up this branch somehow. So I'm just getting yarn to run on another terminal here. This does take a while. Can we have some hold music in the meantime?
Well, you know what? Hey, we had a question come through. Why don't we, while you're doing that, Rob, check out, this is a question about the tutorial and Postgres. So let's grab it while we're there. But this was by, I want to say Yosima. Apologies if I don't pronounce your name correctly. But do you see that question, Rob, or should I repeat it? Well, actually, recording, people won't be able to see it. But are you going to include Postgres database setup in the tutorial? From 0.25, there's no SQLite, so it feels necessary to make this step very clear and easy for new people using Redwood.
Not sure what they mean by no SQLite in 0.25. Do you know what that means? Because SQLite's still around, still works.
Maybe they're referring to the switch that now happens from tutorial 1 to tutorial 2 if people want to use Postgres.
Yeah, I mean, there is a step where once you deploy, so it used to be, let's back up a little bit, Prisma had, they called it multiple provider syntax. So you could say, I want to install client libraries for SQLite and Postgres, and I'll use SQLite locally, and I'll use Postgres when I deploy. They've since got rid of that. So now you have to only have one provider. And since SQLite is not really a viable production database, you basically kind of have to use Postgres or MySQL. So, you know, you're developing locally, you're using SQLite, everything's great. And then as soon as you deploy and you pick a database, Postgres, now you also have to use Postgres locally because you can only have one provider in there. But I think for the tutorial, we weren't really going to go through that. Like, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible and have like as few new skills you have to learn. Like, a lot of people aren't really database administrators and aren't going to know about spinning up databases, like installing Postgres locally and creating a user and creating a database. So we wanted to just stick with SQLite, keep it like super simple. I think Prisma itself actually includes the SQLite binaries, right? So even if you don't have SQLite installed in your system, it still works as soon as you get Prisma working. So we might have like a, you know, for if there is a note in there that's like, once you've, you know, go to Postgres, you're going to have to install Postgres locally. Here's how to do that. And we link up to some docs. But I think the tutorial itself is always going to kind of stick in SQLite land just for simplicity. One less thing to worry about.
That makes sense. Dom, if you have a chance, there is a great doc, a Redwood doc on setting up Postgres locally with some hints and tips about how to do that. Maybe just to make clear as well, if you want to use Postgres to do the tutorial, that's great. You can choose whatever local database you want to use, and that should be fine. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, if you know what you're doing, if you like know about Postgres and have it installed locally, you just change your provider in our schema.prisma file, change that to say Postgres, and you can use Postgres locally from the very first step of the tutorial.
Right. Perfect. Just one or the other.
Yeah.
Danny, let us know when you want to jump back in, but otherwise we'll keep doing it.
Yeah,
we can
right.
keep going. Oh,
So,
well, then do it. Do it.
Thank you for helping me out there from the embarrassing bug there. I think what happened was my node modules just got, while I was messing around with this, I had to get rid of it and reinstall stuff. So we're back online. And so the main difference after that was that I just ran build web once node modules are properly installed. Make sure that does happen, otherwise you'll get errors like mine. And you'll see this new build step that appears, which says pre-rendering web. And this has happened because in the meantime, sorry, I just added that earlier, but there's a couple of other pre-renders here as well, which tells you that these routes need to be pre-rendered, right? So if we ignore my setup issues that I had, the main thing you needed to do was add this prop here, and that's it. So once it's built, let's have a look at what it's produced. And you'll see there's index.html, which is our Redwood blog. And notice here where it says loading, that's because the Redwood blog has, if I can open up the browser again, let's open it up here so that we can compare side by side a little bit. So this is index.html, and you can see what it's loading is here it's loading the cell, right? And the reason it's not styled is because the CSS loads once you open up the browser. But we're seeing just plain what HTML is being produced. We also added the pre-render prop to the about page. So if you open here, you'll see it's rendered the about page with the content there. So let's go have a look what it has there. Yeah, makes sense? We also had a private page, which I actually don't know how to access on this application, but I do want to show you what gets rendered for these pages. Nothing at the moment. So let's try and figure out why nothing gets rendered. So let's go back into our code, and you'll notice that I added a pre-render prop here, but it's a private route, right? So there's no point pre-rendering a private route because you only want to show people things once they've logged in. But what you can do to make the experience a little bit nicer so that they don't see a white screen before it renders your page is you can use this while loading prop. And this has been part of Redwood Router for a while. So people who've been using it, you're probably used to it by now. But this one can take a React component. But in this case, I'm just going to keep it nice and simple. I'm going to just render a string. And so what we hope to see when I pre-render it is it renders this string hello in the static page. And then when your application actually loads up, it'll replace it with the full page and its content. So let's wait a minute for this to happen. Cool. And let's go have a look what is pre-rendered. I realize this is not very exciting looking at HTML being rendered, but I'll show you a little bit more, something a little bit more interesting in a second. This is much more of a let's upgrade it together. But what you see here is my fantastic loading component that I just added in. And I'll show you how you can use these little tools in a nicer way in a second. I really wanted to have a little bit more time to prepare, but unfortunately things come up. So what I will show you now is how I use this in the demo app that I prepared last time. So let's first look at the performance difference. So pre-rendering has a bunch of advantages, SEO and all of that. I'm not an expert on it, but I can show you the difference between a performance difference between a pre-rendered app and one that isn't. So between the two sides, these are identical in the code. The only difference is one is pre-rendered, one isn't. Another thing I want to show you here is that I have throttling enabled, and that's just so that we can, this is where we're simulating a large bundle file about how long it's going to use. So let's load this side first. And you can see it took a while, and there was a spinner and a white screen while it loaded, and it shows up. And now let's load this side up. And you'll notice how much quicker the left side is. And that's because of something. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and find out why it's a little bit quicker as well. So remember that diagram I showed you earlier? We can actually see this in the network graph when you load up your browser. So keep an eye on the section here, the network section, and see it starts all of this, but it only loads up once the chunk.js and the app.js is downloaded. Let's try that again. So it's loading, and it loads up only once this is fully loaded up, right? So let's have a look at this one here as well, and let's see what the difference is. You'll notice, maybe I need to make it a little bit slower so that you can see. Yeah, you can see that the JS actually hasn't loaded yet, but the page became visible. Was that, did that come across on the video stream or not really?
We could see it, but you could throttle it even more if you wanted to.
I can throttle it even more, yeah.
2G.
I can't.
Yeah, it's too fast. Pre-render is too fast.
That's very, like, I don't know what's happening. I'm going to try a fresh one where maybe I have a feeling my browser's, no, it literally is just fast. Sorry, I can't slow it down any further at the moment. But
I think that makes the point very well, though, Danny.
Yeah, fair enough. So what I wanted to show you here is that let's start with the right side. So the right side only becomes visible when you have all of these things load up until this point, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, and these are all just the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript bundles, right? And on the left side, it shows up as soon as the first one loads up. Actually, no, the first one and the CSS loads up, it shows up. It's shown it in a different order, but you can see it starts the load, but finishes the load earlier than the JavaScript, just because of the different sizes. And my JavaScript bundle for this demo app is quite large, actually. And this is why you can see the big difference between the two sides. Cool.
We had a good question just come in. Yeah, good question just came in. The total load time for the pre-render, the left side screen, is longer now. Why is that happening?
It's because I set it to 2G, I think. That was literally the 3.54, and let's have a look here. I don't know, actually, why it's showing up this way.
Well, is there more? Maybe, Danny, this is something you talked about in your slide, that there is a bit more happening early on because more things are being loaded to make pre-render work. So it's possible, again, we're talking microseconds at this point. But you do change, like there's some change to what each of those boxes in your slide contains.
Yeah. I think there is a subtle difference here. because you can see when I do load it, sometimes my browser comes up with this is taking a while to load. I wonder if it's the throttling, it does it slightly differently.
Yeah, if you just turn off throttling completely, what is it?
Yeah.
What do they do?
Okay, let's turn this off. And there's a slight difference. Cool. So this is throttle turned off. And you can see there's no white screen. In order to see this, I have to start from a blank page. Right? That's how it loads up.
You can still load the inspector, I think. You just make sure that the network throttling is.
Yeah, it's because I have disabled cache here normally. Cool.
750 millisecond. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it might be, I don't know why the difference in between the two sides, but visually I can see very clearly that there's a huge difference between the load times. I don't know exactly what the calculation between these two things
Well,
are.
the left side is doing more work because it has to render HTML twice, essentially. Or I mean, not necessarily. Like if it's, I mean, I guess if it's all the same and it's rehydrating, it's not actually rendering the HTML, but it has to do the diffing.
Yeah.
So
that DOM content loaded time is a lot faster. Look at that, 150 versus 750 almost.
Yeah, and maybe this difference is coming from the hydrate. Quite possibly. This is a really great question because I never actually spotted that bit on the inspector.
Well, the one on the right is now taking longer in this last load that you did.
Yeah, I suppose it varies a little bit based on, yeah, how, like the network conditions varies a little bit, especially because I'm on 5G, so that might change things a little bit.
But right, the number that we really care about the most is that DOM content loaded number is much more important. Like getting that first paint so that you see content is really what pre-render is all about.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions at this point? No? So now I want to show you also what this page looks like to bots with pre-render and without pre-render. So I'm going to just take this stuff off for a second. So this button here just disables JavaScript. And you can see bots. This is debatable because I know that the search engine stuff is improved quite a lot, but still sometimes there are recommendations to say always have pre-rendered code for bots to index stuff. But this is the difference between a pre-rendered one and non-pre-rendered one, because all of the HTML is actually already there. So that's the difference that bots would see if they load up. I want to show you another thing with JavaScript disabled. What you remember the while loading and the private pages? This is what I'm doing here with while loading. So dash is a private page, and I can show you what happens on this one. You see, this one has JavaScript disabled, so it won't actually load. But what happens is, I'm logged in here. What it does is it opens up while loading, but there's a little white flash before that, and then renders the full page, right? And the main difference here is the while loading prop is used to pre-render it, which is why as soon as you go to the website on your browser, you see the while loading page with no waiting. And then it renders your full private content. Cool. Next, so we've covered cells.
That's really cool. And I think just to point out too, there's a lot of data things happening under the hood that are just working here. So Danny, other than handling the while loading state, is there any other magic involved to make data loading happen if you want to pre-render first? Like, do I have to do more things in my app? Because you wrote all this code that just makes it work.
Yeah.
See, that's I wanted to put an exclamation mark right there. That's
so,
like that's anyway. It's really amazing that it just works that way when you want to load data.
Yeah, I mean, what the key thing is, Redwood has had these concepts right from the beginning. So cells have had this loading component. Routes have had, or routes have had, while loading the prop for a while. So if you're using these optimizations already, and instead of just having a loading text here, if we have something a little bit more interactive, like you saw in that demo there, and you'll see I actually did it for the cells here as well, but I'll need to throttle it for you to see the loader. Maybe you saw that for a second, just there. So the while loading cell, the loading component in my cell was that one that showed up there. So because this is a private page, you're not going to see the cell loader actually come up by default, but it will once the page renders. So these are all default concepts, or I wouldn't say default. These are concepts that have been built into Redwood for a while, and Prerender just builds on top of it rather than introduce anything new. Okay. So let me just quickly recap. We've set up the app. We've covered what happens to cells. We've covered what happens to routes. But there's one other thing I need to show you. Now, in order to see the output of Prerender, it's always, you need to build your web app first. Your Redwood app first. So what we want to do is, if you wanted to see what is pre-rendered, you need to open up your disk folder. Remember the one that we were looking at? So let's open this up, and there's another optimization I actually added here. Let me take it out and show you why I added. So what I'm going to do is use a non-Redwood, just a web server, just to demonstrate to you how the HTML and JavaScript loads in this project here. Cool. Remember, the API side is not running, so I expect to see errors when the API, any GraphQL call is made. So all of the cells, I expect them to fail. Great, yeah, that's expected, but let's have a look at the About page and load it up here. So what I need to do in order to show you the problem we're having is I need to tilt it first, because the previous one already had the optimization in here. So let's build it first, and we'll see a little white flash that happens when I open the About page. And the main reason I'm using the About page is because it has content that you can read better, and it doesn't have cells. Because when you have cells, it just shows the loading one. So the About one is a little bit easier to spot the differences in. But in your actual application, you're likely to do this with the home page, not the About page. So we've done that. Let's do the same again. And I have to remember to throttle again.
There was, I saw it.
Did it come through, the flash?
Yeah, we saw it.
Yeah, cool. So sorry, on video streaming, it's hard to see. But that white flash happens is due to the bundle splitting that gets enabled unless you import a page. This is actually described helpfully right in the roots page, roots.js component. So this is by default always there. So what we want to do as an optimization here is let's load about page by default as part of the main bundle, right? So once you do that, again, this is an example. In your case, you very likely want to use your landing page. But it actually doesn't matter whether you're using landing page or any other path here. The process is the same.
Danny, so if I did my landing page, my contact page, my about page, and wanted all those pre-rendered, I would import them all?
No, you don't need to. So
you guys talked over each other there.
Sorry. So you don't need to import all of these things into pre-render at the moment. You only want to do this for your maximum, for the pages where most of your users are going to land. So ideally, that is your homepage, or maybe you have a dashboard and you can include that as well. And I think it is our plan in the upgraded router to be a little bit smarter about this as well. And the reason this happens is literally because of the optimization to do chunk loading. So if you don't import like this, it makes your bundle a little bit smaller for the initial load, which is usually what you want to do for your homepage. So if you want to, you can certainly import whatever you want here, and it'll just add it to your bundle. But remember, you're just making your bundle a little bit bigger every time you import something here. So it has to be a choice that you're making in your application. Let's wait for this to happen. I really need an M1 Mac, I think. Cool. And let's serve this. And really what you're going to see is that there isn't going to be a flash in between. Yeah, it's still loading the bundles, but there isn't a flash anymore. And if you're interested on exactly why this is happening, try on your application, and you'll notice when the page shows up and the chunks get loaded. So until the about page is loaded, what happens is it shows the pre-rendered page. It then shows a white screen, and then shows the about page again. And that's literally because it's still loading the chunk, and in the meantime, it shows a white flash. Cool. Any questions? I think I saw a question somewhere. There's a question, will all the pre-rendered pages flash unless we import them into the main bundle? Yes, in the current implementation of Router, it will. But remember, it's a trade-off between optimization on one side, where your bundle keeps growing, and on the other side, it's making every page load up without that flash. So once you start playing around with it, I think it becomes obvious what pages need to be imported into your main bundle. Cool. Any other questions?
Danny, did you have more steps in this part of the presentation you wanted to go through, or would now be a good time to open up for broader topics?
So I think I've covered all the steps. I had a lot on my list, and I think we've covered all of it. Yeah, I'm good. So if there are any questions, very happy to.
Yeah, let's do it. And I think another thing that we would welcome here too, questions and topics around how does this feel? Like the implementation, do you have any feedback about that? Are there things that you wanted to see? Do you have questions about what would be helpful that might be coming next for these types of performance at scale? So specific to pre-render, but other things that we're thinking about for the framework. Please, let's open up to all those topics. If you have other questions, now's a great time. And if anyone would like to join on the stage, either by video and audio or simply audio, that's great as well. Just let me know in the chat, and we'd love to get you up on the stage for the discussion as well. So open it up.
The great thing with these sunglasses is I can do a reaction GIF after seeing pre-render. You can do a...
That's good. Oh, Dom, we forgot about docs. We forgot to highlight the docs, so now could be a good time for that too.
Yeah, so
totally.
All of the steps that I actually ran through, it's in the docs, which Dom is going to walk you through now.
Yeah, let me post this in chat here. These are the 2 links to the docs, and then I'll share my screen real quick and go over them. So we got docs for pre-render. Just like everything Danny covered is going to be here, like from cells and private routes to like all the pre-render utils. You'll definitely probably have to come back to that section once you get into like working with libraries that need a little more like control over when to render and when not to. I'll definitely fix some of the JSX looks weird in the code blocks. I'll make sure I get that fixed. But anything Danny covered, we're putting in this doc. So like don't feel too overwhelmed if it was a lot of info. Like, well, you can always come back here and to the presentation as well. Like even the Flash page load, which you just went over, like just all of it's going to be here for you to reference. And then the custom index too is the other doc that kind of goes hand in hand with pre-render here. It's not exclusive to pre-render, but this is just like a reference to a command in case you need it for when you need more customization over like how things mount to the DOM, or if you need to do other things for like other things need to mount as well. So that just those 2 docs, so you can find them like in the sidebar right here, pre-render, and then custom index. But we'll definitely get more cookbooks coming up for like maybe how to make those like loading screens that Danny showed. Like there's definitely like a lot of helpful tools. Like Tailwind has a utility class just that'll do that for you like almost right away. So we'll make sure we have like more resources on how to like get those polished experiences. But this doc will definitely grow as we add more features to pre-rendering. Right now it's covering the like it was almost going to be too short at first, right? Because it's like, well, you just have the prop on, but we wanted to obviously cover all the use cases. But it is like such a nice API, and just covering like the utils and how you can get unstuck, like especially if you're like trying it out in Canary, like make sure to like if you have any problems in debugging, like do the dry run and report it to us, and we'll handle like if a library wasn't working. I'd love to highlight that here. So just a thing to be to watch out for, and we're hoping it's like going to be a great experience. Did you want me to go over anything else,
No,
David?
that was it. We could, I guess, show off the pre-render dry run. Danny, I don't know if we did that. Does anyone, I'd be interested for those that are in chat and viewing, by a show of emoji hands, or whatever emoji you would like to choose, who thinks they'll be adding this as soon as this releases out, or taking this for a spin? And in what ways are you, in what ways are you, where would you use it in your app? We'd be really interested to hear that kind of feedback. Now that you've seen it demoed, where do you think it'll be most helpful, and how soon do you think you're going to add it? I love all the emojis.
Could we do this more often? With emoji voting, we should just make it a thing.
This is good. I have no idea how we count the votes, but it's satisfying to watch all the emojis.
Yeah, it is.
I originally planned to show pre-render in tutorial part 3, but I don't know, Tom, is it awesome enough? Should we like show it in the first part?
Maybe, probably. It's something that like everyone will want to do for their homepage, right?
Yeah, so maybe like before you deploy, like, oh yeah, by the way, to optimize the homepage.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy enough to demonstrate, right?
Yeah, I guess we can show some of the customization for it in part 3. How to like read packages and images.
Yeah, go deeper into it a little later on and show all the options.
Okay.
Danny, the way that you're handling those nice little loading outlines, whatever that template is that an easy thing to add? We didn't see that part of it.
Sure, I could walk through that if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to. We're technically we had 3 more minutes for this time, but we could spend a little more time on those things. And I'm because people haven't played around with it yet, thinking they might not have too many questions. The one thing that was helpful when I saw it was if you would demo the after you build using the new pre-render CLI command and being able to actually view the static file from there. And it gives you some helpful input too about other things that won't be included in the pre-render and what to do with that. Or not that you even have to do something there. It tells you what's not included in the pre-render and maybe raises questions around should I include those or not.
Sure. So this isn't going to take very long, but I'll show you. This is the demo project that I was showing you before, the more the one with a little bit more finesse. And the way I did the loaders on that one is that bit here, which is my component. I'll go into the component in a second, and I'll just show you the roots as well. There's a while loading with an actual component rather than just some text. And if we have a look at what these components are, so I'm using this library called React Content Loader. And essentially what it does is it takes SVG and gives them a little bit of sheen. I don't know yet whether I will recommend this library because I don't know how responsive it is. But I personally also done this with a bunch of other libraries, and Tailwind does make it quite easy to write your own rather than just use pre-built ones. And let's have a look at the table loader. It's largely the same thing, a bunch of SVG stuff here. Cool. So you wanted to see also the debug CLI. So I'll run this on the other project that I have ready. So you don't need to run this, just to clarify, you don't need to run this if normally you just run build, it will run the pre-render steps for you. But let's make it fail. How about that? And then we just try and debug it, right? So this is quite easy. I'm going to make it fail now because we know that nullify identity doesn't work on the pre-render when pre-rendering. So when we do this, and let's just wait for it to
wait for it.
Unfortunately.
It's a satisfying thing. Go ahead, Rob.
So if you just use yarn redwood dev, of course, it's going to ignore all of this and you wouldn't have any indication that pre-render is running or not. And even in this case here with this nullify identity, it wouldn't matter, right? Because the pre-render is not kicking in.
Yeah, that's the, as soon as you get into pre-render and you start trying to pre-render things, it does come with a little bit more complexity. That's why the Redwood way of opting in, I think, is better. Because it means that if you're not ready to handle that complexity in your application, you don't have to. If you don't have any roots marked with it, it won't do anything. It'll just leave your application as is. But if you do want to optimize, you have the option to.
Right.
So you can see that it comes with these errors. But these errors are they're not particularly helpful, are they? Because we don't know where it's coming from, right? So the way to figure out why your page, in this case, I've modified app.js, but let's modify a page and then we'll see what happens. Let's just actually make it completely fail, right? Oh, wait, no, this won't even build. So what we need to do is what's a function that I can use that's only available in the browser? Local storage, right? So this is definitely going to break, but it's an example showing you when you use certain libraries, sometimes behind the scenes, they use code that only runs in the browser. So this is where the utilities that you have in the documentation Dom showed, you would use. But this is going to break. So let's find out how we debug it so that you can post a error report for us to figure out. So you run the prerender CLI, which is literally RW prerender. I'm going to add this dry run flag so that it doesn't write the changes. And let's just add the verbose flag for good measure. And when this happens, and fingers crossed, it fails. It does fail. And it gives you a helpful message to say not all routes were pre-rendered. It's very likely that your code doesn't support server-side rendering. And unfortunately, we have to scroll up because I'm pre-rendering a bunch of things here. But I first want to point out, could not resolve, these are warnings. So these aren't the reason why your application is failing to pre-render. So please don't be alarmed. This is something we will fix, but these are just warnings. You don't have to worry about it breaking your app. The other thing is, if pre-render doesn't work, it doesn't break your app anyway. It just doesn't optimize it. So that's the key thing to note. You don't have the optimization, but your app will still work. So there's no need to panic if it starts breaking here. So with the verbose mode, you get a lot of this output, but you actually see here that it's saying the about page has failed specifically. It says window is not defined, and it also gives you this stack trace here. So this is how you get a more detailed error report if something in your application isn't working. But before you raise an issue, I would encourage you, have a look at the libraries that you're using on that page or you're on your application. And if that page, if that library doesn't have universal compatibility or server-side compatibility listed in its GitHub page, it's very likely that's the reason that's happening. So when you start handling things on the server side, it comes with this little extra complexity. But as long as you pick your libraries to be universal or server-side compatible or SSR compatible, you should be totally fine. Any
Thanks,
questions?
Danny. That's really, really helpful. I'm glad we covered that. That was really good talk. You made it too simple, Danny. Way to go.
I'm wondering if in that app.js file, would it be helpful to add some comments in there to help people understand how to do the is browser thing? Because I think that'll end up being a common question, right? Which is like, oh, I need to set up some auth thing, which I mean, our setup command should do that for you. But if you got something in there that's going to do stuff on window and you slap it in there and you go to run your thing and it's completely broken, you're like, now I'm screwed. And you're not even thinking about pre-render, but like you broke it because of pre-render, and it would be fine if you just wrapped it in that is browser thing, but you have no idea that you're supposed to do that. How can we help people get through that kind of pain? Open question.
For example, the setup command with I think this is what you're referring to, Tom. The setup command is now changed for Netlify identity. If you run Redwood setup auth Netlify, it will include that is browser. And I believe there's a comment there explaining why that's there. Is that correct, Danny?
Yeah, that's right.
So it does that. We don't have it in the default. And I think Pat is asking this question as well. We didn't necessarily cover all the utilities, Danny, but you have utilities so that you can add that logic into the page. If a package library that you're using is failing, you can handle that with a switch right within your code. So those utilities are available. Danny, I don't think we covered that specifically. But Tommy, I think your question is more about how do we let people know those utilities are available?
Yeah, I'm just trying to predict what the path is going to be for people that come in and need to add some thing there that is going to work only in the browser, and they're not going to know that they need to do something special for to allow for pre-render. Is there a way that we can set people up for success by either having a blank, like importing is browser, and just having a blank, like a conditional in there from the start, which is like, if you've got things you need to initialize, but they only work in the browser, like here's where they go, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll put it right there because that's where it goes. That would require importing that library and having it be there even if you don't use it, though that may end up in the bundle anyway. So, or maybe it doesn't end up in the bundle at all if it's not being. I actually don't know, but there, there's trade-offs there anyway. We don't have to talk about it right now. It's just something that strikes me as a sticking point for people that come in and don't know Redwood real well. And because of the fanciness that we have to do, we've made things a little less obvious. And can we make them more obvious through some technique?
This is one of the things I think, because of our opt-in pre-render, we're avoiding a lot of issues here, because sometimes when you're building something, that's not the first thing on your mind. Optimization, I feel like, comes in later sometimes, unless, I don't know, maybe people do it differently. But
that's a fair point, right? Like if you never ask for anything to be pre-rendered, then you could have you could import Netlify identity there without any conditional at all, and it would be fine.
Yeah. And so I know from personal experience working on other frameworks like Next, which is not I'm not throwing any shade at Next. I think it's very, very good. But one of the things I struggle with their version of pre-render, because it's enabled by default, is that as soon as I include a library, it just breaks, and that process I found frustrating.
Yeah.
Whereas with the opt-in model, what you can decide is, hey, today I'm shipping this other major feature. I don't have time to fix the small UI library that's breaking my code. It gives you that option to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I really like the concept of adding pre-render on as a optimization, as a caching strategy that you consider after you've spent some time developing. Like if you don't care if it's a little toy app, like you're not going to get a zillion users, then like don't even worry about pre-rendering. Like it's not something that you have to do. It's this layered set of optimizations on top of a fully dynamic app, and it makes life a lot easier if you don't have to think about those things in the early days. And so worry about them when you need to worry about them.
So this is a great topic because there is so much conversation around rendering, where things render, right? It feels like, oh, if a framework doesn't do X at the very start, then it's not even worth me trying. Like all these things are going to be really important. So Tom, I think you should expound a little bit on what you're saying there. Like when do I really want to use pre-render? Like when does it really become important versus when is it helpful or arbitrary? Because I think those things do kind of matter, but it's hard to understand when you're getting into this ecosystem what matters, because there's a lot of people telling you what matters.
Yeah, well, to me, it's all about caching. Like all of these things, all of these fancy techniques that we have to make our single page apps more performant are caching strategies. And anytime you start caching, you make your life a lot more difficult because you're adding a tremendous amount of complexity. This is true of any of any application that is optimized. Optimized code is messier than non-optimized code. And so you want to use it only where it's really necessary so that it least complicates your life and leads to less complex code. And so using it judiciously, I think, makes sense. There are some things that SPAs have that are unavoidable. One is the desire to ensure that you've got good SEO. And that's going to be almost anyone's going to want their landing page to be performant and indexed with a high degree of certainty. And so I think while it is an optimization, it's a very, very, very common and highly desirable optimization, which I think is why we might want to introduce it early on, as well as just showing people that it's possible. Because like you said, one of the big questions that people had early on was, well, how do I do SSR? Right? People want to know that they can do that. And so being able to give them some solution, and right, we don't do SSR. This is like, we will do eventually things that look more like SSR, server-side rendering, that will solve certain types of problems down the road. Maybe, like, we'll figure it out, right? Like, we're taking a first principles approach and saying, what are the problems that you will run across as you try to scale your application, or as you try to solve some of the disadvantages of SPAs, search engine optimization, performance? What are the problems that people have, and how can Redwood help you solve them in a Redwood kind of a way, while keeping the complexity down? And hopefully, as you've seen in the interface that we have here, with adding a single word to a route, you get all of the, I mean, that encapsulates a tremendous amount of complexity, which you can get yourself in trouble very easily by trying to use libraries that need access to window, and now you've broken stuff. So that's where the complexity comes in. Now you have to think about 2 environments instead of just one. You have to think about browser and server, where before, without it, all you had to think about was browser, and life was very simple, but maybe not as fast as you like. So you always pay a price for these optimizations. You can make the price as small as possible, and we will always try to do that. But they are, at the end of the day, caching strategies that increase complexity in some manner. And so I think it is on us to teach people how to do that. And so this concept of Redwood at scale, which we use to kind of encapsulate this whole discipline of caching strategies that we're going to embark upon, of which this is step 1, that will be part of that journey for people to say, like, here's how you cache a landing page with no dynamic URL bits, and here's how you cache URLs that are dynamic, and here's how you cache the results of a cell, which you can't do right now either. Those are things that you might want to do at build time, like you would with building the dynamic pages of a blog. You need to ingest the dynamic parts of the URL, and then run the page as if you were running it in your browser, including running all of the cells at build time, which comes with its own challenges of, like, where is the data? How do you tell your build process to find the production data? And what are the security implications of that? And you can read about that in the proposal that I originally did, linked at the beginning of this talk, around Prerender. I was thinking about it from those terms of how do you not do it in the way that Danny's done it, with just non-dynamic pages that are really not dynamic at all. But how do you do it for pages with data, and how do you connect it? And does it connect over GraphQL? Does it connect over some other channel? Like, what do you have to feed that, like, generate the data into JSON and then feed that into the build process? Like, what is the mechanism? That'll be a really fun design process that we go through for that. But this is the stuff that I love. The stuff that I love the most about building a framework are these design decisions around what is the interface to the human? What does the human have to know and experience in order to get the results that we want? And I love thinking through the design of that, because there's a million ways that you can do everything. But the end result of a project is just the accumulation of a million small decisions. And so each one of those small decisions really matters.
I'm glad I asked. Thank you, Tom. We're officially over our overtime, and not many more questions coming in. So I think we're there.
So I had an answer for the question that stumped me earlier, why it's taking longer. on the pre-rendered version.
All right, here we go.
So I actually already had the answer. I just forgot myself. But you remember I made this stuff a little bit longer to show you that it takes longer to load? That's why. Because so the page I showed you had some critical CSS optimizations where I actually put CSS in the HTML as well. This is outside of the Redwood pre-render. This is just something I was playing around with. But what that does is duplicates the CSS, small parts of the CSS, it duplicates. So even though the space between these goalposts actually grow larger, the experience, because of this loading so much faster, is that's why it looks and feels faster, even though overall, when you add all of the times up, like it does add up to a larger time for the whole page to load. Does that make sense? So if I go back to a smaller one here, these don't really change in size, but if we do just pre-render, you see that this grows in size. So this right bar is actually shifting ever so slightly to the right. And if you do with critical CSS optimizations, it grows even more. So that's the reason you see the difference in that time between when we loaded the pre-rendered one and the non-pre-rendered one, even though the interactivity is much faster. Sorry, the experience is much faster.
Nailed it. At the buzzer, Danny.
We're talking also, Danny, right, about inlining CSS potentially too, right, to get that first load time even faster at the expense of making your HTML file larger. But that's another type of optimization that could lead to faster paint time.
Yeah. The process of inlining critical CSS, it's quite a difficult one. And sometimes, so I have a way of doing it, but I'm not confident enough that it will always work in every scenario. So that's the reason I didn't want to include it in this pre-render release. But if you wanted to, there's loads of great libraries that help you do this. You can always tack that on at the end to optimize it even further. Without pre-render, you wouldn't be able to use that at all in the first place. So this is something that's enabled by pre-render.
Sounds good. We had a few more questions coming in. We can, I hate to cut, when the chat's going, I hate to cut it all off, but if I hit that end event button, it's all over. What will happen next is, several things. This is recorded Meetup. We're going to be posting online. We always do a recap in our forums, including some notes and links and a link to our Redwood YouTube page. But if you subscribe to the Redwood YouTube page when this video is live, that'll be today. That'll pop up and you can rewatch the video. And version 0.26 will be coming out. We need a few hours just to finish up the release notes, but that will include all the instructions you need if you want to upgrade and links to all the docs that Dom referenced earlier. If you're starting a fresh project, you're good to go. You'll still want to use those docs that Dom referenced, but all you need to do if you want to use pre-render is add pre-render to your routes. And a good starting place for that would be to download the repo for the tutorial too. And that's what Danny showed us today. So Danny, Peter, everyone else that helped on this, way to go. This is an amazing final product for what was a lot of work. And a lot of people are going to make really good use out of this. So thank you all.
Just to render HTML, right?
Just to render it, right? To do the thing that we were doing very simply back in the late 90s.
That's all we really ever do, though, isn't it? Render HTML. That's what we've been doing for 30 years.
Oh, here we are, back at the beginning. So very good. Let us know what you think. If you take pre-render for a spin, definitely show us how it's working in the forums. Is a great place to do that. Or over in the Discord chat as well. So yeah, very fun. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for sticking around for a little bit of extra time. And with that, I'm going to hit the end event button. Going once, going twice.
Bye, everyone.
Good job,
See
Danny.
See you all next time.
Awesome stuff.
Well.
Full English breakfast.